Hello, nerds, and happy spooky season. Welcome to the Geek Girls Story Salon, where I talk to creatives from across disciplines and across the world about the art of storytelling. I'm your host, Jen Jackalone, lifelong storyteller and head geek in charge. We've got one last guest for you this season after today's show, and it's Belinda Bromlow of Hulu's The Great. So if you're not already following us, smash that like and subscribe button to join us for that show, courtesy of our partners fleetoffandoms.com and Yulva Publishing. But today, my guest is a blogger and science communicator who talks about conservation and all things nature, both on her incredibly charming Instagram, Steph and Nature, and as one half of the podcast team behind the pod Planty Zoo Zoo. Welcome to the show, Steph Martin.
Thanks. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining me. I discovered you through Leah Elson, who was another guest on the show, and I said, do you know anybody else who's really terrific and would love to talk about what they do? And she suggested you, and I checked out. She's fantastic. She's Wonder Woman, as far as I'm concerned.
She is. Yeah.
So I guess first, give me the chronology of. Did you start, was the communication thing something that came later? You were first a scientist, or was this sort of always kind of swirling in the air?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of both is right in a way. In terms of my sort of professional educational background, I ended up going the science route. But my sort of passion and interest was always in storytelling. I, loved writing stories as a kid, loved reading them. And then when I started doing my undergrad degree, I got really into sort of communicating science, but doing it through photography and writing and blogging and things like that. I had a blog before my current blog, which was just very simplistic, mostly retelling of information I found online. Like it was fine as a starting point. It was fun. And then, I sort of begun to take it a bit more seriously, especially during my master's. So I did an undergrad in biosciences. I did some field work out in Madagascar, looking at different vegetation making up this forest, and did a master's degree in tropical forest ecology. So I always loved tropical forests. Rainforest was a big thing for me, just the nature, the beauty of it, and always wanting to know what's going on and why it's going on. Mm-hmm. And then I realized that the realities of being a scientist, of spending months and months and months with the same people in tiny basic conditions. While I love going out on hikes and things, I quite like my comforts, and I very much like having control over my own time, and I like a lot of alone time. And these are all things you don't really get in field stations. And I think that, coupled with my dislike for statistics, and like sort of trying to figure out all of that, I just decided the stuff I really looked forward to was when I could tell other people about what I've been doing and what I found. So it was when I could go on Instagram and be like, oh my gosh, I did this really cool thing today and look what I found. Or I met this really cool person who taught me this. And I entered a competition, a science communication competition, and I won that. And that sort of encouraged me. And then I started to get offers on Instagram to work with brands and things, which was quite fun, like a different kind of storytelling. And then when I finished my master's, I was like, I'm just going to carry on science communications for a bit, have a nice break, sort of thinking I'd go back into academia. And then there was a pandemic. So I just carried on sort of doing that, a lot of editing, but a lot of other bits as well. And then since then, I've picked up some short-term contracts doing other things in sort of the wildlife conservation world. But now I'm really going for it with the freelance science communications. So a bit of a long version, but that's basically how I ended up where I am.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's sort of fun because you don't know how the narrative is going to unfold itself, and you can sort of go in with a vague idea of what you want, but it's not necessarily where you're going to end up. For example, 20-ish years ago, I thought, I was actually taking a run at being a professional musician. And
Nice.
yeah, so I do have a past life as a rock star. And I actually ended up marrying my producer. So uh,
That's good. So that worked out quite well then.
yeah, it did. It did. I have no regrets. But now I'm writing and I, got a book out and a podcast. So the path
Mm.
isn't necessarily always straight. And usually, to be honest, like with the more interesting people that you meet, the path isn't straight. They've
No,
been
it's
they've
very,
been around.
I used to always think that there was like this perfect formula or perfect path. And if I could just like figure out exactly the one I want to be on, I'd just like copy that and do that. And I thought that all up until I think my early 20s.
Mm,
And then I realized that people's paths are only their paths in retrospect. Like it's
mm,
only, most people, it's just they're prepared for opportunity to come their way. So you
mhm.
work hard to make sure that if an opportunity comes by, you can grab it. Um, and that's, I think, the best way, really. And you end up taking so many side quests. It's so much fun.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You have to. The real trick is just to be aware of it when there's the light shining on the little doorknob that you're supposed to turn or whatever. It's like side
Yeah.
quest. Um, but that's the fun thing though, and those are the people that have the best stories to tell most of the time, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
I think.
so okay. Um, I want to know how you settled on the name for the podcast.
Planty Zuzu, yeah. Um, So I came up with this idea of I run the podcast Planty Zizu with my fiance Connor Davis, and he's a brilliant science communicator, and he's all about animals, loves zoos, and my whole thing is plants. So when we met, it was great. We
Mhm.
had like a lot in common and a lot to talk about. And a lot of our conversations did revolve around plants and animals and whatever cool thing we'd read or seen on the news or heard. And they still do. But then we sort of started to get to a point of like, I reckon we could record some of this. I reckon we could actually get some good stories out of this. And there's not a lot of people, in science sectors because it's quite a serious field. Sometimes science communication is seen as, sort of looked down on a bit, I feel. So there aren't loads of people telling these stories with the public and really engaging wider audiences. And we both at the time were working at Bristol Zoo. So our jobs were as engagement and learning presenters, literally telling people these stories about conservation. So yeah, we just felt well equipped and we set up this podcast, and the concept was all my idea, which I like to bring up a lot, which was basically that it's a hypothetical zoo and botanical gardens called Planty Zoo. And every week, Connor adds one species of animal, and I add a species of plant. Sometimes it's a few more than one. And we just add it into our botanical zoo, botanic gardens, and talk about it. We talk about its history, like the species history, any conservation work that's going on, cool things it can do. Like really, it's really fun. It's a bit silly, lots of laughs, and yeah, we just bring out an episode every couple of weeks. So when it came to naming it, we really struggled. I don't know why, but I'm notoriously bad at coming up with like titles, headings, anything like that. I think I'm too literal. Like I would have happily just called it like the Imaginary Zoo and Gardens podcast or something, because I get too literal. But I was lying in bed one night. I like often can't sleep, often insomnia, and I was trying to think up a name, and I was lying there for hours coming up with the stupidest names. And this one came into my head and was somehow the least stupid. And it just made me like giggle out loud. And so I was like, okay, well, if it's making me giggle out loud, it's going to make Connor giggle out loud, which means it's probably the right amount of silly
Mm,
to actually convey like the tone of our podcast.
mm,
And then since we released the podcast and people started following us online, a few people have mentioned that they shared the clip with us from the Mighty Boosh. Have you heard of the Mighty Boosh?
mm.
Yeah, that show, they have a zoo on it, and there's a song that's like nicey nicey zoos. And so I think my brain, like deep in the recesses of my brain, sort of dug out that and just stuck Planty on it. So now it's Planty, Planty, Easy. So it's very fun because sometimes we'll be at like science conferences or like important, fairly serious events. And we'll be like, oh yeah, we have a podcast talking about nature. And people will be like, oh great, I'll check it out. What's it called? And then sort of go, oh, it's Planty, Planty, Zuzu. But then I think we're attracting the right audience.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're honestly like your pod is aimed at probably people kind of in my demographic, meaning um I think my folks, I was a child of the 70s, so it was the whole like, you know, they were really big on, girls can do anything, and they really wanted a scientist. Like they bought me a toy microscope or I mean like
Oh.
toy, but like, somewhat functional. Like they were really trying to encourage me in STEM. And unfortunately, I'm a writer, um but the sort of result of that is that I am a science groupie. Like I don't have the
Mm.
wiring to be a scientist, but I love science. I love, you know, I will watch and listen to stuff like your program and, like watch the stuff that, Leah does. Um and it's interesting to me. And I think there's such like there's a scientific illiteracy that
Mm.
I think is out there. Like people just aren't learning things that they should be learning, I think. And, what you're doing is actually really important. And, if you
Mm.
have to give it a silly name, then,
It
to
helps.
reach
It
the,
helps.
yeah, but that's how you're going to reach the people you need to reach. Um,
Yeah. No, definitely. I completely agree. I think it really came out during the pandemic how little of a scientific basis
mm,
that people can have. I mean, we have it in the UK all the time. You see things in the news and headlines, and you're like, no, that's obviously wrong. Or
mm,
even the Prime Minister will make statements, and you're like, no, that's not what that is. And it's really, really worrying. So I think it comes down to what's the point in doing all your science and publishing it in these journals that the public can't access because they cost like thousands of pounds in membership.
mm,
What's the point in doing that if no one's going to tell the average Joe about it or make sure that it's accessible to people, policymakers or people that can get galvanized into taking action to force governments and corporations to make changes that we need. Like there's no point. Well, there's some point, but there doesn't feel like much point. And I think that's where I really identified my skills as being someone who loves the story, is very curious, went down the science route because they adore nature. Like you, I don't quite have the brain for it. I'm more wired for storytelling. Always did worse in science than any other subject at school, but it just didn't stop me. Um, and yeah, and I think that's where I feel like I fit in to the
mm,
niche, and I'm very excited for the future because I'm setting up a environmental digital marketing, like green digital marketing services as well. It's sort of
mm.
launching the next month or so. So
Ah,
it means that I can do even more of that storytelling, but I can do it for like sustainable brands. And
mm,
it's, trying to get rid of stuff like greenwashing and actually getting people to properly communicate good parts of their product, their organization, their whatever. So I see myself as fitting like a very specific niche,
mm.
and it's very exciting. And I think we definitely need a lot more science communicators, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think with with anybody that's doing any kind of work that's aimed at sort of at the general public, there's always this little respectability conversation that we have with ourselves. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm,
okay, but is this like serious? In your case,
yeah,
is this really science? Is this sciencey enough? And for me, it's, well,
yeah,
is this really literature? Is it, um,
yeah,
you know,
yeah. It's so true. Yeah, I've definitely felt that. I remember some scientists brought out a fantastic paper a while ago. might have been before the pandemic, but it was to do with using Instagram to communicate science. And it
Mm-hmm.
was really important, really necessary, not been a lot of research done. And one of the comments they got back from reviewers was like, Instagram, really? Question mark, question mark, question mark. And it's like, yes, because that's where all the people are. Like, if you want to tell people about the science, you have to go to where they are. Like, it's a weird snobbery.
It
And I
it
think it comes from people sort of caring more about their own, themselves as an individual than what they're actually doing.
yeah,
It's a shame.
yeah. Well, I I tend to think that the anti-intellectualism that we have here as a cultural thing, and that you guys seem to have a bit of there as well, that,
Yeah.
a good portion of it comes from that snobbery and that, sense of like, oh no, no, this isn't for you. This is like too serious for you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like they want to keep it hard because then it makes them look smart.
Hmm.
Just
Yeah.
criticizing every scientist right now. Hopefully they'll work with me in the future. No, I think that there is there's a large chunk that think like that, and I think the ones that don't think like that will agree with me
Mm.
that it is a problem. And it does lead to things like scientific illiteracy, and that leads to things like people not taking up vaccines, which has enormous effects on individuals and populations. And yeah,
You
let's not
know,
go down that.
we used to have this stereotype of you guys, the
Mm.
meaning, the English, like we used to have this
Yeah,
stereotype of you guys that you had it so much more together on that front, you know, and it was really like it was personally shattering to learn like how no, you have the same problems we do.
yeah,
But that's,
yeah.
go ahead, sorry.
Oh no, just yeah, definitely agreeing with
Yeah.
you.
Um, okay. So, um, so what is your favorite plant that you have added to your hypothetical?
Ooh, yeah, it's a hard one because when we started, that's the first thing I did was add all my favorite plants.
Mm.
But I guess my favorite one is the strangler fig. I actually have a tattoo of it, so I can show you what it looks like. It's like, oh, I'm not working the
Oh,
camera well.
there it
It
is.
like
There it is.
starts
Okay.
down here,
Oh
and then it
boy.
grows up,
Oh
and it's
my
all like
gosh.
entwined into this like leafy bit.
Okay.
But yeah, they grow in a really cool way.
Hmm.
And like a seed will land on, a bird will poop it out, and it will land on a branch high up in a tree, which has got like a little bit of, leaf decay matter there, a bit of basically soil there for it to start growing on. Starts putting out these really cool tendrils and starts growing down to the ground. And at this point, it's known as an epiphyte, which is a type of plant that grows on another plant but doesn't cause it any harm.
Hmm.
So it's not parasitic. But then it puts these tendrils get big enough and long enough, they're down on the ground now, um, and that's when it starts taking nutrients away from the strangler fig tree. It starts sucking up, nutrients away from the tree that it's growing on. The
Mm.
strangler fig starts taking them, and
Mm.
then it gets bigger and stronger. And then suddenly, the tree that it's growing on finds itself being like crushed by these vines from the strangler fig, and then that tree will end up dying and rotting away, and it will leave like this hollow but incredible structure, this like lattice shaped, because the vines start to fuse together as well, so it just forms this lattice shaped structure, and they're just absolutely amazing. And I saw them in like every rainforest I went to,
Mm.
um, and they just always blew my mind, because sometimes I tell people about how strangolithics grow and they're like, oh, is your tattoo like a sentimental thing, is it a metaphor? And I'm like, no, I just really like them. So it's nothing like that. I just think they're really cool and I like tattoos. So but yeah, that's my favorite. So I added that on episode 1 because I was like, let's
Mm.
get this out of the way. And I think the way that I added it was like, we were going to have a big mangrove area in our imaginary zoo, and it's going to be hummingbirds in there. And we had this whole thing. So maybe like a climbing frame or something. I can't remember. It gets
Mm.
quite hectic. I think we've got like a narwhal swimming pool at this point. It's hard to keep up. But yeah, we've got a spreadsheet. So
What you really need to do, you guys, is do like a map.
Oh, I know. We've got some very talented artist friends,
Mm.
like wildlife artist friends. That's why I've got this massive nature wall behind me.
Yeah, I
um,
see.
yeah, it's a lot of them are done by our friends, and I'm sure at one point we're going to pay someone
Mm.
to create it in real life because that. I think when we started the project, we were like, yeah, we want to do that one day. We're just waiting for there to be enough.
Mm.
um, but yeah, there's lots of wild ideas there.
Yeah.
Ones that
The
can never happen as well.
well, but that's fine. That's fine too, I think. It's funny, like the way
Yeah.
you were describing the sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, sorry. It just makes it more fun.
The way you were describing the strangler fig and what you're sort of left with after it has depleted
Mm,
the tree that it's wrapped around, it reminds me a little bit of like I don't know if you guys have this there, but I'm sure you must. Like sometimes you'll just be walking in the woods and you'll find just like a staircase by
mm,
itself to nowhere.
yeah.
And usually that's because there was a house there at one point, but
Mm,
time and whatever, it's crumbled, it's gone. There's a forest now, but the staircase was like the fundamental part of like the strongest part, so it still sticks around. And so you
yeah.
come on these things and it's just like this sort of it feels otherworldly.
Yeah, I love that. We have a place around in Bristol called Blaze Castle, and the grounds there have like lots of little stone bridges over rivers, and
Mm,
they've got like some caves that were
mm,
but like man-made with like
mm,
stone and stuff, and all these little things you stumble upon, and it's very like inspires your imagination a lot.
mm,
Yeah, I think that's why podcasting's so fun because it's that combination of the things you're interested in, but you're really trying to tell stories.
mm.
Um, so yeah, it's a very fun one.
Okay. Follow-up question.
Mhm.
What is your favorite animal that Connor has added?
Ooh, I think it's going to be the one he added recently because I hadn't heard of it. He added a mud skipper.
What's that?
It's a type of fish, but it's really weird. It goes on land, so it literally looks like it looks like something from SpongeBob SquarePants. It's literally like that big, and it will just like stand on its tail, and it can move by like skipping. And if they're, it's like they can drown from not going on land or something. I have a horrible memory, so I
Mm,
might be making stuff up.
okay.
But like, yeah, they're really cool and they're very. Some of them are very colourful. I
Mm,
absolutely went the way he was talking about them, the way he was describing them, telling his story of them, just really like blew my mind. The fact that he didn't even know they were real, and like some of the stuff when he talks about different animals, sometimes there'll be animals you've heard of before and you have no idea that they can do certain things.
mm,
It's amazing. We both learned so much.
mm.
I'm slowly turning into more of an animal person. He's slowly becoming more of a plant person. He
Well,
has to be really. We've got so many plants now.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's the true sign of a partnership. Over the years, you just turn into each other.
Yeah. Yeah, it's embarrassing, but yeah.
Um, okay, maybe you can settle this for me. What
Mhm.
are mushrooms?
What are they? Well, you know, on Planty Zuzu, I've taken ownership of them because I wanted to introduce fungi, and I was like, I don't think Connor will because obviously they're not animals and they're not plants, but like they feel similar, similar vibes.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, I mean, they're in a family all on their own. They're just super unique, very amazing. I think we have a lot more to discover from them. And I think every species that we find still, because people always think, especially with animals, we found every species we can find. And maybe of the really big ones, that's true. But like with plants and insects and fungi, that's not true at all. Like for every hectare or acre or whatever of especially tropical rainforests that we're losing so many species because
mm,
we know so little about plants and insects and fungi, and a lot of our medications come from those things. So yeah, I think fungi are very, very interesting.
mm.
I can't remember the one I introduced now. I'm sure it was great though.
Yeah, well, like fungi are weird because I mean we share some DNA with them, don't we? Like we're
Yeah,
not completely. There's sort of this weird alien
yeah,
thing, right?
yeah. I definitely have read something like that before. Isn't it the same with banana as well? We're meant to share DNA with bananas.
I've heard
I
that.
lose track.
That's see that one's weirder to me. Like that. See
Yeah,
the fungus, the mushrooms. That almost makes sense to me somehow because mushrooms are so strange anyway. Do you know what I mean? You know,
yeah.
you read about things like the mushroom that grows in a spider's brain, and then
Oh God,
is
they're horrifying. But yeah, the fungi are that yeah, they're very, very cool. The stuff that they do, yeah, growing in insects and turning them into zombies and things like that.
mm,
They creep me out. But they're very cool.
yes, exactly. And and
Yeah,
that's why I think that what you're doing is important because science is cool, and
really cool.
more people need to understand that. Um,
Yeah, I think science is ruined for a lot of people at school because of how it's taught. And I think it almost I think the only thing that made me persevere with science was my love of nature because I did not enjoy science lessons at all. Um, so yeah, that was a very very lucky thing, I guess. But yeah, I think there's so many brilliant ways to teach science. But yeah, that's a whole other topic, I guess.
it's adjacent, I would say. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
so
I think it's getting better with more people being online and doing things online. Like, people follow TikTok scientists and get to discover a bit more about the world. And yeah, it's getting better. So I think this accessibility to different forms of media helps so much in so many different ways.
mhm, absolutely. Yeah, I started following a Scottish geologist whose account is literally just called Scottish Geologist. But
Amazing.
yeah, and it's fantastic. I'm learning all this stuff that I probably wouldn't have, you know.
Yeah. I think people like learning. They like learning on their own terms. Or I know for me anyway, like I found school so hard. I was like, why can't I just be left in a room by myself with books? I'll be fine. But I had to do all these stupid group activities and changing tasks, and I'm terrible at changing tasks. And
Mm,
yeah, I love learning. I just want it to be what I want to learn when, and then I'm brilliant. But and I think a lot of people work like that. I don't know how you could structure schools around that, but yeah, and I think that's what things like TikTok bring is people learn so much and it's on their own terms and it's for fun and it's quick and
mhm,
yeah,
mhm.
big fan.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about TikTok because or things like the Instagram Reels where it's just like a little bam 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 and you just keep getting these little dopamine hits. Like I have to stop after a certain point because it gets to be too
Yeah,
much for me, but yeah, I think that it definitely does have a place and um it does have value. Um
for sure.
so I want to ask about um what it is for you, I guess on that sort of deeper level or that ineffable level when we talk about, connecting with the things we really care about. And what is it for you with nature? And like what does it hit in you that makes you love
That's a
it so
really
much?
good question. Yeah, I don't, it's really weird. I don't really know. I just remember always being so, just so aware that this is the most important thing
Mhm.
and that every moment you can spend in nature is such a special moment. Um, and there's all kinds of things of like, oh well, my parents took me outside a lot when I was a kid, and I had a primary school that had lots of trees, so that maybe that helped. But I don't really know what it was that really caused it. But I guess in terms of how it makes me feel is just it really does feel like when you're in a woods or something like that, or you're swimming in the ocean, it really does feel like this is the most important thing and it gets everything into perspective. And I think people forget that, because we're humans and we've thrown up walls and we've got, electricity, cars, we've got business management, we've got, we've got concepts, we've got all these things. You forget that you're part of the ecosystem. Like, we're no different to like a squirrel or grass in that sense. Like, we are also part of this very intricate web of life. And this is why, climate change is such a huge thing, because what we do matters. What we do doesn't happen in isolation in a bubble. What humans do affects every single other insect, plant, animal, the weather, everything. We're all intertwined. And I think that when you're in nature and you immerse yourself in it, you really, really feel it. And so I think I've just always felt that. Like, I'm not a spiritual person, not a religious person, but I do, when I'm in the woods on my own, there definitely feels something very special. And I think that probably is where that's all come from, is just that feeling. And I think also beauty as well. Like, I'm a hoarder of, well, not quite a hoarder, but I have a lot of very pretty things like art and all kinds of nice things, ornaments and stuff, and clothes. Oh my god, it's way too many clothes. And I just like looking at things. I get such like a hit, like a dopamine hit from looking at beautiful things. And there's, to me, nothing more beautiful than like a tropical rainforest. I think I saw that. I had a lesson on it when I was 10, and that was it. I was like, that is like the gold standard for beauty for me. That's it. And so just sort of always seeking that out. And I think that's why I went down the plant route too, probably just beauty. Like, animals are great, but you can't beat like a collection of trees building a whole forest. It's just stunning. So yeah, and I think people do feel that when they go into nature.
Right. A sense of connection
Yeah,
to.
like a sense of belonging.
Mm,
It can just be hard because it's not always accessible.
mhm,
And especially if you've grown up, in a city. I know in the UK, we're very, very nature depleted. I think we're like one of the least, something like we're least biodiverse in Europe, or we've lost the most something in Europe. It's bad. We've had a lot of
wow.
news. It's really, really poor. And I know growing up, I grew up in the southeast, just north of London, and I really was like, wow, there is no nature here. Like, the only way I can get into nature is if I go to like an isolated pocket that's being fenced off and I'm allowed in. And even when I go into these pockets, I don't feel safe because, everyone knows sketchy things happens in the wood and sketchy people hang out in this tiny patch of woods, or, I never felt safe in it. And it was only when I went abroad to Australia, I started a degree there, and I was in the proper, like the wild and the bush and everything, and I was in the Daintree rainforest, and I was experiencing real rural nature. And when I came back to the UK, I actually found there is nature here, and it's not just in those tiny fenced off pockets. It's like the foxes in the street, and it's the squirrels, and and I could appreciate UK nature because it was so different from the nature I'd gotten used to in Australia. It's just that we've done a really terrible job of preserving it, especially in the south. So yeah, but now I live in Bristol, and yeah, very, very nature heavy here in terms of the environment surrounding it, but also the people that live here are very tuned into nature. There's a strong wildlife sort of industry, and yeah, lots of wildlife based people here, which is nice. So yeah, I think it can just be hard for people to find nature, sadly.
Mm. Are there any rainforests or other places that you would like to visit that you haven't? Because it sounds like you've been a lot of places, but is there
Yeah,
anywhere you'd like to
I mean, very
anywhere you'd like to
um,
go?
I'd really love to go to Indonesia. I'd love to go to like Bali and just more of Southeast Asia as well. Like, I've not, most of my traveling has been some south. I was in the Amazon rainforest for a bit. I was in Australia, Borneo. But yeah, there's anywhere that there's a rainforest is where I still want to go.
Okay.
Basically. But yeah, there's places I've been that I'd love to see more of. Like, I was really lucky. Went on a family holiday to Cuba
Mm,
once for a week. It was amazing. And I didn't, we went, yeah, I went there for long enough to do, proper dive into the forest there.
mm,
But I saw some and I just thought, wow, I'd love to come back. and explore more. But yeah, there's always things to see, and even in your local area, you probably don't even notice, but especially as seasons change, it's the best time. Dawn and dusk, as the seasons change, they're the best time. And you'll always see things. But yeah, I definitely appreciate the nature more from where I come from, because I left. And but it's so exciting when you go abroad. And like Connor's got really into birding, so now I've started to get interested in birds. So I think partly I always wrote off animals because I'm so unobservant. Like I'd go, like whenever I did field research, people would point things out to me and I'd be like, I had no idea that giant like 6-foot snake was there. And so birds being far away and needing to memorize bird calls and things like that. But now we've got apps doing that. It's kind of more appealing to someone like me who can't retain information, because I'm dyslexic as well. So that was always a struggle in science. But apparently dyslexics are more creative. So that explains the interest in storytelling.
Right.
But it definitely meant, science memorization. Oh my God, what a nightmare. I had an interview once at Kew Gardens, and I'd properly revised the night before, trying to learn like plant names so I could bring stuff up. And then I went there on the day and I couldn't remember a single plant species. And like they literally were trying to help me. They were even like, just a common name of any plant. And I was like, I literally couldn't remember the name of any plant, not even like a house plant. It was gone. It's so weird. So, yeah, not a science brain.
Yeah, well, ADHD here, so
there you go.
Similar thing.
Yeah.
All right, so I have one last sort of question for you, which is a hypothetical question. What would the world look like if the humans all disappeared?
Oh, I love that question. I think that the world would be fine. I mean, the world would keep going. The world definitely doesn't need humans. If anything, it would have benefited if we'd never evolved because of all the things we've done. And I know when I was younger, I very much saw, I think you're sort of taught, human custodians of nature. But then you get older and you're like, wait a second, they're custodians of nature against other humans. Like although we're part of the ecosystem, there would be very real effects on things if humans disappeared. But we cause so much damage and other species don't need us. And while some species would, probably die out in areas, or especially if it's like humans disappeared, if we're thinking about, I don't know, something apocalyptic, I assume other species would go. But life can always continue and evolve and survive. So yeah, the world doesn't need humans. The humans need the world. Because it's we breathe the oxygen the trees make, and we drink the water that's we get out of the rocks and wherever else, springs and things. And it's just a different mindset. But I think the world is moving in a positive way. I know when I was younger, like at school, there was still these big concerns about, well, global warming was always the term then. There were the same concerns, and seeing some massive shifts in my lifetime, even stuff like people not using plastic straws anymore. And that was because of, on the back of like a BBC show and a video of a turtle with a straw in its nose, and that's the power of sort of digital media as well. So that's just one example, but there's been loads of positive shifts, and I feel so sad for the youth with their climate anxiety, because I have anxiety generally. I just have, anxiety. And I know how it feels. I had that same climate anxiety when I was younger, except there wasn't a term for it. And I feel so bad for them because it is so scary, and it's really hard to wrap your head around all these changes and feeling so angry because you didn't cause it. But all you can do is sort of appreciate the fact that it is so bizarre to be a human existing. Like, that's such a weird series of events that has led to any of us just existing here at this time as humans. Just enjoy it while you can, give back what you can, and do your best. And then at some point it will end for you, not to be morbid, but it will. And then, the world keeps going, and whatever will happen will happen. And if the world ends for humans, it doesn't end for life. And I don't think it will end for humans, to be honest. I think that just as all of nature, we will adapt and shift and find ways to keep going. And there's so much cool climate technology coming out now. I think it's very exciting. So that's my message to anyone with climate anxiety. Enjoy your time while you can, give back what you can to make it better for the next generation, and then you'll die and it won't matter anymore. That's terrible. In Norway and in Scandinavia generally, being like, does anyone know where this came from? Because again, in these countries, people had them, but everyone was like, I don't know where I got it. Like, it just like, right. I don't know, someone gave it to me. Like, people were just handing it around. And yeah, they put it on TV, and they got like, it was like 10,000 responses or something. And people managed to narrow it down, and they realized that it had been brought to Norway by this guy, Agnes something, and he was a missionary, and he'd been to China. And so he'd ended up being like getting a cutting of it from China. I think he stopped off somewhere, I think it was India or somewhere, and held it there for a few years, and just had it growing on his windowsill, and then came back to Norway with it. And then he, being a generous guy, was growing it, handing it out to his friends, and it just, and that's how it ended up there. It's how it ended up in Europe. It's how it ended up in the UK. And yeah, you get them for like £5 from IKEA now. Like, it's so easy. And I just love that story, because it's, people, I think, don't necessarily think of plants as having interesting tales and backstories, but actually they have so many, not just in, folklore, yes, mythology, his like traditional uses in medicine, but also just in how they ended up all over the world, because there's plants in every country that don't come from there. And it's so fun trying to track down that story. So yeah, I thought I'd show that off, because I think it's brilliant. And I think it's always worth, if you're listening to this now and you're looking around at your house plants, have a look at like where it came from, how it ended up being sold in your country, because I guarantee there'll be something interesting. Yeah.
So this was the 70s that the UK was...
So it was, the 70s was when it started showing up a lot in the UK, and when botanists were going, maybe we should actually start figuring this out. But I think it arrived to the UK for the first time in the 60s.
And so they basically crowdsourced to figure out.
Yeah.
That's fun.
And again, they use digital media.
That's so fun, because we think of crowdsourcing as such like a new modern thing, but
yeah, but no, people were desperate to figure it out, I think. And yeah, very, very cool. And I love to think about what's maybe floating out there now. Like, did someone get gifted a weird plant on holiday? I accidentally brought back highly toxic beans from Peru. I didn't even I had a whole I did a whole podcast episode on that as well, called I can't remember, like, it's probably got the word beans in the title, but because I went to a charity shop in the UK a few months ago, and I was like, oh my god, that's a security bean. It contains a substance that's more poisonous than ricin. Like, it's deadly. And it was just hanging on a necklace, and so I had to go to the shop assistant and be like, oh, heads up, that's extremely deadly. And I hadn't known either. But and actually, those beans, they were being sold in jewelry that was being sold at the Eden Project in the UK, which is like this big indoor rainforest biome. It's really cool. It was being sold in their gift shop, because they didn't even know.
Oh my god.
So yeah, like, it's really interesting to think about what might be floating around different places now, and what stories might come out in, a decade, 2 decades, the next few years. There's stories everywhere if you look for them.
There absolutely are, and I hope that you keep telling them for a long, long time.
Thank you.
I'm gonna do a little sign off. If you could just stick around for a minute and we can wrap up everything, that would be awesome. So that is our show, you beautiful nerds. I've been your host, Jen Jackalone. Please hit like and subscribe if you enjoyed this chat, and check out the link in the description to check out what Steph is up to. Stay hydrated, take care, take it easy, and stay geeky.